Hello, and welcome to the latest Atomic Game Engine update video. I'm Josh Engebretson from Thunderbeast Games, and today we're going to be looking at the Atomic Editor. What I have here is I've got the About screen open, and I can see that I've got these platforms, which is Windows, Mac, HTML5, Android, and iOS installed. I also have the 2D and 3D modules, which is important on the 3D module because today we are going to be looking at some 3D features. What I can do here is I'm going to make a new project, and I'm going to move relatively quickly here because there's a lot of ground to cover. I'll go ahead and make that. And what this does is it basically makes a template. Kind of gives me a template for a new project, which includes things like a blank scene. So first up, can't do much with a blank scene. So what I have here is I've got my project frame. This is where the resources for the project are contained. Things like my components, my models, my scenes, my scripts, my textures, prefabs and things will go into here. This is the hierarchy of the current scene that I've got open. I can see that I've got a scene open here in my resource frame. And over here is the inspector, which is currently blank because I'm not inspecting anything. So if I go ahead and I have a few assets already kind of set up as far as wrangled, and so these are just assets that you could get from anywhere. They could get them from an artist, perhaps. Things like models, which are in standard film box format. I've got some textures in here and just some raw assets that are going to be used for today's video. So one of the first things I can do is I'll just go ahead and drag this box FBX into my models. And what that's going to do is it's going to import it so that I can just drag it out in my scene. And it's a white box because it does not have a material applied. So let's go ahead into our textures here. And let's take a blue grid texture, drop it into our textures. And then if I go to the materials for this box, I can see that, first let's set up the shader. I can see that I have a diffuse, normal, and specular texture map. I've got some shader settings and things. So if I go ahead to my textures and I just drag my blue grid over to diffuse, there we go. I have a box. That box has a texture on it now and a material. Let's make sure we save that. So if I go into here, and which is the hierarchy, and I want to make this kind of a ground so we kind of have a starting spot. So let's go ahead and scale our box up to about 100 units on the X and Z. We'll leave the Y unchanged, which will basically just give me a nice big ground of sorts. And I'm noticing that this texture kind of gets pretty big here when we're talking the scale. So what I can do is I can go back to my materials, and I have some shader setting here. One of them is for tiling. So let's just pop this up to 16 on the X and Y, which will give me kind of a nice little tile to work with. So it's a little bit more visually to scale. All right, so we have a model that we just brought in, imported, and applied a material setup. So next up, let's go ahead and add something a little more interesting to the scene. What I have here is the ubiquitous crate. And so I will drag that, which is a standard film box file again, into our models. And then I can just drag that crate. Oh, that's the material. We don't want to do that. We want to drag the crate out. So we have a crate. It's kind of a very dark crate, which also tells me that we're going to probably need to bring in the textures. So let's do that. We got some crate textures here. And then once again, I can go to the materials, and I can drag this out. And I also can use a standard selection for resources, which is kind of convenient. You can just click, and then it tells you exactly what textures you have in your project. We want the normal map here, and then we're going to want the specular map. All right, so that's pretty cool. We do now have and I want to make sure I save that. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got. I have a camera here, which is a default camera. Let's drag this back a little bit, and I'll hit play, which will go into the player. And I can see that I've got my crate, I've got my grid, and when I hit play, it's just using my this camera, which is kind of the main camera of the scene. All right, so let's make this a little more interesting yet. We'll select our crate. Let's add some physics here. We'll add a collision shape. And we'll add not a geometry, a rigid body. So I want to go in here. This is probably, we're going to want to set the collision shape from the model. And then I want to add mass here so that it's not a static shape. So if I hit play, I should have a falling crate, which I do. So what we're going to want to do here is we don't want it just to fall through the ground. So let's give the same treatment to the ground by adding some physics to it. I'll also set this from the model. We don't have to add any mass here because we don't want the ground to move on us. All right, so now our crate falls and hits the ground. It would be kind of more interesting if we could see the shadow here. So there we go. We now can see the shadow of the crate on the ground. All right, so it would be kind of a drag if I had to do the setup for the physics and the crate and all that every single time. Luckily, I don't have to do that. I can go to my resources here. I can create a folder. I'm going to call it prefabs. I could call it anything I want, but prefab seems to make sense as I'm going to be putting prefabs in it. All I need to do to make a prefab is drag from the hierarchy view into my prefabs folder, and then I can make crates as much as I want. All right, so basically these are all prefabs now. This guy is not a prefab, so let's just delete him because we don't want to have the non-prefab in there, which would confuse matters if we make adjustments to the prefab. Because once I change one prefab, it will affect all the prefabs. So let's, for example, let's go in here and we'll turn off the cast shadows. So now that's just on this instance. Until I actually save the prefab or undo my changes to the prefab, it's not going to affect the other prefabs, and it actually won't persist. So if we do hit save, now all the prefabs in every scene will have that adjustment. So let's turn that back. And all right, another thing we have here is we have copy and paste. So I can just copy and paste more crates. And if I play the scene, oh, my camera's kind of screwed up there. Let's just move the camera so we can get a little better look here. And we'll kind of center it. All right. Hit play again. All right. Yes, that is indeed working. So one of the neat things about prefabs is you can break them, which is not a bad thing. So let's say that I have another thing, like a palette, for instance. And in fact, let's bring that in first. So I just, again, take my film box model, FBX, and have a palette here. And I'm going to need to set up the material, which means I need the textures. And so let's do that. All right. And then I'm going to select the palette and make sure I assign these. And I'm just going to do it this way, because this way is quick too. Or I can just drag this out. All right, so now what I have is I'm going to save I've got a palette. And it looks to me like the palette is perhaps a little small. It is, and I'm going to actually put a shadow on there too, because shadows really do help. You kind of judge where things are in the scene. Oh yeah, look, that's tiny. So apparently our artist made the palette a lot smaller than he made the crates. But that's no problem because I can just go into my palette. This is my import settings for the model. And I can go ahead and let's just pop it up about 4 times. And there we go. We've got a properly sized palette. And that would affect every instance of this in the scene because we're actually scaling the imported model. All right, so we have this palette model. It would be kind of nice if that had physics on it and everything. So the way I can do that, and if I look here, I actually have a little component symbol next to the crate. This isn't standard. This isn't finalized UI by any stretch. We'll be adding more bitmaps and things so that things are clearer. We only have a subset of icons set up right now. So anyways, this just tells me that it is a prefab. And what I want to do is that the palette is a lot like this crate, just really with a different model, but it has the same physical characteristics. So I don't really want to have to do and set that all up again. So what I can do is I can break the prefab. We'll note that this goes away, so this is no longer a prefab. If I just go into my static model, and I can go to my models here, I've got a pellet model, drag it across, and drag and drop right into the model field here. And then you'll notice that it's now using the crate. However, it's using the crate, or it's using the pellet model, but it's using the crate material. So all I need to do here is drag and drop the material directly from the project frame right into the scene, right on the model that I want to apply it to. So we have drag and drop of that too. And what I'm seeing here is that the physics shape is not correct. It's actually using the crate's physics shape. So let's fix that. All right. So if I hit play, I should have a crate, or sorry, a pellet. And the pellet is behaving properly. I can see it over there. Now I can do the same thing. I can just rename this pellet. And let's create a prefab of that. So now we can make those easily. And then I'll just delete this whole node because we don't need it anymore, because we can take and just drag out new pellets. All right. So there is that. And I can copy and paste these too, of course. All right, let's see what that looks like. All right, yeah, it's looking like a physical simulation. Okay, so now we have some stuff in our scene. This is probably a good time to, this black background here is a little boring. So let's go ahead and make a new node. We'll call it skybox. This is probably giving away what this is going to be. Then we'll create a skybox component on there. I'm going to need some textures and some materials. So let's go ahead and add those. These are the skybox textures. I do already have a skybox material set up, so we're just going to drag that into our materials. And then the last thing is that the sky map is a cube map, and so this is a little file that sets that all up. All right, so if I go into here and I take my skybox and I need to assign the box, and then we'll assign the skybox material, and voila, we now have a nifty skybox that kind of dresses up the scene a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and play, and there we have it. Okay, so the next thing we need is a way to kind of move around inside our scene. The other thing is that I'm noticing that our shadows are fading away a little fast here. If I go into the global light, change our cascade, which I'm going to do. Let's pop it all out so that we have shadows that kind of maintain a little longer. All right, and I'll save my scene. All right, let's see. So the next thing we have is we've got our Roboman. Now this is an animated model, so I can just drag him in and drag him out. And we have Roboman. I'll kind of put him next to the crate here so I can get an idea of his scale. I think that's a little big for a Roboman myself. They're kind of supposed to be small and cute. So we will go into his scale, drop it down about 0.75, which is good. Now Roboman has some animations, and we do support importing animations. Just see, I've got a little file here that the artist gave me that has some information. So basically his animations are baked into a single FBX. These are the frames. So all I have to do is set up his idle animation. Not that one. And then a run. So it's 108 and 124. And so this is super simple. And I hit apply, and now that just imported his animations just that quickly. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to, actually first let's just get rid of that guy now that we have the model imported with his animations. He's going to need a material. So if I go into the Roboman material here, and we're going to need the Roboman texture. So let's just go ahead and drag that out. And here I can just set the Roboman diffuse texture. There it is. Well, he's a bit shiny, so I can go ahead and change that. And let's just drop these down as well. So he's still shiny, but not quite as. All right, so we have an animated model here, and he's had his materials applied and everything. In order to make Roboman work, he's going to need some components, which, as I don't want to have you all watch me type, I'm going to drag his components over that I already typed up. He's got a Roboman. Oh, this is the integrated JavaScript editor. He has a Roboman component, and I can see that the Roboman component requires an avatar controller, which is a general purpose kind of third-person controller that you can kind of steer a character around with. The Roboman kind of customizes it a bit with some different animations and just different like controls and things. So all I need to do here is I'll go to my Roboman and I will add a logic.js component, and I will select the Roboman, and then I will create another component, and I will select the avatar controller, and then I will go to the scene. And if I hit play, this should work. I should be able to steer around the Roboman. And yeah, so it's totally valid to have 2 or more, as many different JavaScript components on a scene node as you want. And that did not work. Oh, haha. All right, so this is a good time to talk about the new player. So the new player actually works in a separate process, which is going to set things up nicely for being able to do plays on the web or on device without having to go through time-consuming build processes. But what I'm getting here is a player error over in my editor process, which doesn't crash the editor, by the way, and keeps your editor nice and clean, so because you're not launching players constantly and tearing them down inside your editor. But anyways, it can't import GLMatrix, which is a JavaScript module. So let's make sure we have that, and I'm going to create a folder here called modules, where I'm going to stick all the JavaScript modules from the internet that I am going to pull down and use in my project. In this case, I've got GLMatrix off of GitHub, and I just dropped that inside my modules, and I hit play, and now I am running around inside the scene as Roboman with physics and all that. So I'm noticing a couple things here. One, Roboman doesn't have shadows, and we like the shadows, so let's fix that. The other thing is I'm noticing that this has got quite a bit of specular on it again. I could just change the global light specular, but it's a good time to show some of the shader editing. First up, let's go to him and make sure he's casting shadows. And then let's just go to our material here. Let's tighten up the specular range a bit so it's just like a lot tighter. And then let's really drop it so that it's really barely noticeable. Yeah. Yeah. You can probably go a little higher. All right. Much better. Not so blown out. All right. So I'm not going to just go hit play right now because all we did is change those 2 things. What I am going to do is I'm going to change Roboman into a prefab, because prefabs are really nice whenever you have anything that's set up more than a trivial model or anything. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag him out so we have Roboman back in this. That's a palette. We don't want that. We want Roboman. All right, so here's our Roboman component. And so one nifty thing I can do is I can just copy and paste another Roboman. And if I hit play, I actually going to have 2 Robomans in the scene, which is just showing that this is pretty robust. And they are separate. I mean, they see the physics is working on one that's on a palette, and the other one doesn't interact with it. But one of them falls off. Bye, Roboman. That's just kind of showing that, you know, things are pretty solid here. Another thing we can do is let's go ahead and select the prefab. And I'm going to break Roboman's prefab. Go into the animated model, and I have this other texture, which is an atomic Roboman. And then I'm going to set up a new material. So if I just go to my materials, and we're going to create a material, and we'll call it atomic Roboman. All right, so it's a brand new material I just made, and I'm going to go ahead and select the Atomic Roboman texture, and then I'm just going to drag it out again. And now I have a brand new Roboman. Who's got kind of a nifty little atomic symbol on his hand, and he's kind of themed. All right, so I actually like this Roboman better. So let's go ahead and delete our previous prefab, which is going to give me a nice warning. Well, confirmation, really. And so I deleted the prefab, and then I'm going to delete him from the scene. And then we want to make our new Roboman a prefab. Voila. So now I guess go ahead and delete him so that I'm using the prefab again. And, whoop, that's the wrong thing. I want to drag out the prefab. All right. So now I've got a Roboman prefab with the green texture instead. And I could have just, I could have just taken the other prefab and applied the texture and then saved the prefab, but I wanted to show breaking the prefab, having two independent Robomans and all that. And we don't need this node anymore. All right. So, let's see. I gotta look at my notes here. This one's kind of there's a lot going on. Okay, so one thing we have too is the editor has a live reload capability. So let's go ahead and change our scene up a little bit here, just kind of the feel of the theme. And so if I go into my textures, I actually have another set of skybox textures here for kind of nighttime. And we'll just take those and drag them over. And they should update in real time here. All right, so now we have kind of a nighttime beach theme going on, which is making our global light seem a little bright. And I'm going to kind of cheat here and just use I could go in and really change all the stuff, but there's a simple brightness multiplier here. Let's just drop that down to like probably about half. So it's kind of a bright night. And then let's go ahead and create ourselves a light and bring it up. Okay, so the other thing is let's kind of increase the range of our light a little bit. Maybe 30. Yeah. Okay, and then let's make it a spotlight, which means I'm going to have to rotate it. And I can move it back a little bit so that it's casting a bit more light. All right. And then we'll take our Roboman. And actually, let's move him over there. Yeah, he's looking good. And then let's take our light and move it over as well. And get him nice in there. Okay. So now we got Roboman inside a spotlight. And so the shadow that's being cast here, that's actually from the global light. So let's take and make sure that this one's casting a shadow too. So that's looking good. All right. Save our scene and hit play. Oh, that means I didn't save my material or something. It looks like I did, but I bet I didn't. I did not. All right. So now I saved material, and now everything's working just groovy. All right, so another thing here is, let's go and select our Roboman, and I can quickly get to the prefab. What I'm seeing here is that on this JavaScript component on the avatar controller, which I will open up here. Actually, that's in components. Right here, I have these inspector fields. These are fields that you can expose to scripts so that you can have persistent editable variables inside your scripts. And right here I've got a speed and a camera distance, which are probably pretty obvious. But if I go in, I can change my camera distance so that I follow way further out, and I can change my speed. And if I go ahead and save the prefab, because that's what's being referenced here, now my follow distance is way out and I'm moving way faster. So this is a really powerful concept. Works across prefabs, works across scenes, and is a really nifty way just to quickly make a JavaScript file, add some fields, add some variables that you can then just edit inside the editor and save. So, all right, so looking over my notes. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's do one more thing here. And let's go ahead and everything that took any amount of setup, let's go ahead and make prefabs out of those things. So I've got a crate, palette, and Roboman prefab. Let's make a skybox prefab. Let's make a ground prefab. Where is my ground? Let's call it ground, so it's easier to find in the future. Okay, so let's make a ground prefab. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is let's make a new scene. So I will create a scene, and let's call it scene 2. And so pretty nifty, I can actually have 2 scenes open at the same time. And now, based on the fact that I've got all these prefabs set up, it should be pretty easy to just recreate what we did in record time. And let's move this down to the origin again, because that would be important for the ground. And let's make a crate. Okay, let's make a palette. Okay, let's make a Roboman. Okay, let's make, oh, I created my scene in there. Let's make a skybox, and the skybox does have to be at 0004 for it to work. Okay. All right. And now if I go, so the nifty thing too is that every Atomic project has a main.js. And this is basically your entry point into the program. It's a standard convention used by, you know, C, C++, C#, Java. There's always a main part of your program. You don't just like take a bunch of scenes, throw them all together, say what scene to load first, and then, you know, it just goes. You can do a ton of setup. This is all going to play nicely with the node, the npm CLI that's coming up, and all that. So what I need to do here is change this, and it should work. All right, so that's my new scene that I set up in record time. And what I'm doing here in main.js is I'm just specifying the new scene, and I happen to create it in prefabs. So the other thing I can do too is if I notice when I hit play here, the mouse isn't constrained, so it's kind of zany to kind of control this. Let's just create a new script. So right inside my scripts here, I can create a script. We'll call it, you know, myutils. Inside here, let's do an exports init equals function. And this is just going to be kind of a throwaway script. I wouldn't have to use this as a separate. I wouldn't have to do this as a separate script because it's going to be really trivial. But I just want to show how this all works. I'll do atomic.input.set mouse visible false, and this is basically going to lock the mouse to the scene. If I go back to my main here, I can just do a require. And my utils, and I believe I called, oops, I can see that I screwed that up because my syntax highlighting isn't right, and I called it a net. So we're gonna have a net. So what this should do is, so this is using CommonJS modules. You can just create new scripts. You can require them just using CommonJS. The relative pathing works, so this myutils is relative to my main script. We could also put it in modules if we wanted to kind of encapsulate it that way. So if I hit play now my mouse is locked to the scene, and it just behaves a lot better. So there you have it. Lots of updates coming. We're looking at getting this up and available for people to test out in about a week or two. There's like lots more information on the forums and things about it. And until next time, this is Josh Engelbretson from Thunder Beast Games saying, go Atomic.